What you're about to witness is the complete and utter destruction of one of America's most arrogant political commentators. Ben Shapiro, the man who built his entire career on destroying unprepared college students with facts and logic, just got absolutely obliterated by a 79-year-old British journalist who did something no one in American media has ever done. He actually prepared for the interview. This isn't just another political debate gone wrong. This is a masterclass in what happens when a professional grifter meets actual journalism. Watch as Shapiro's entire persona, the cool, collected, facts-obsessed debate champion, crumbles in real time. We're talking about a complete meltdown so epic that he literally storms out of the interview while claiming the other guy has never heard of him. The beautiful irony? The BBC host Andrew Neil is actually a conservative. Shapiro is so trapped in his American bubble that he doesn't even realize he's arguing with someone who probably agrees with him on most issues. It's like watching someone pick a fight with their own reflection and lose. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this interview has become legendary as the moment Ben Shapiro's intellectual facade finally collapsed. Stick around because we're about to dissect every painful moment of this train wreck, and trust me, it only gets worse for Shapiro as it goes on.
Ben Shapiro, you're followed by millions of people online and on social media. You're one of the biggest names in American conservatism. What is it you think you're tapping into?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. One, there is actually a hunger for different ideas. The monolithic nature of the United States media is pretty evident in terms of its politics. People tend to agree on essentially the liberal point of view and increasingly a radical leftist point of view in the media. And obviously I speak in response to that. At the same time, I try to provide an honest take on the issues of the day, and that means that I am not beholden to the Republican Party, for example.
This is perhaps the most dishonest statement in the entire interview, and that's saying something. Shapiro claiming independence while being one of the most reliable Republican Party cheerleaders in media is like a McDonald's spokesperson claiming they're not beholden to fast food. The man has built his entire career on defending conservative orthodoxy and attacking anyone who challenges it. But let's examine what real intellectual independence looks like. An independent thinker changes their mind when presented with evidence. They criticize their own side when it's wrong. They engage with opposing viewpoints in good faith. Now let's look at Shapiro's record. He's never met a Republican policy he wouldn't defend. He's never encountered Democratic criticism he wouldn't dismiss, and he's never engaged with progressive ideas except to strawman them. This isn't independence, it's brand management. Shapiro has figured out that claiming independence while reliably delivering partisan content is the best of both worlds. He gets to maintain credibility with people who value independent thinking while never actually risking his conservative audience by taking genuinely independent positions. The timing of this claim is also perfect, because we're about to watch him demonstrate exactly how independent he is when it comes to Trump. Spoiler alert, his principles will evaporate the moment they become politically inconvenient, proving that his independence is nothing more than a marketing strategy.
It means that I am going to speak out whenever I think that a principle is being violated, just no matter who is doing the violation.
You worked for the right-wing Breitbart website, but you left over its support for Donald Trump. And I think you said you'd never vote for Mr. Trump. Why is that?
Well, in 2016, 2016, the Breitbart made a hard turn in favor of one particular candidate, and that's their prerogative. Lots of publications have an editorial point of view, and Breitbart was one of those. The reason that I left Breitbart specifically was because of an incident in which a Breitbart reporter, a female reporter, was grabbed on the arm by Corey Lewandowski, then the campaign manager for President Trump, and was bruised on the arm.
Here we see Shapiro constructing a heroic narrative about his departure from Breitbart, painting himself as the principled defender of journalistic integrity who couldn't stand to see a reporter mistreated. But this story falls apart under even basic scrutiny, and it reveals the fundamentally transactional nature of Shapiro's moral positions. First, let's examine the timeline. Shapiro didn't leave Breitbart because he suddenly developed principles about how reporters should be treated. He left because Breitbart's Trump coverage was becoming politically toxic for his brand. The Lewandowski incident provided a convenient excuse for a departure he was already planning. This is classic post hoc rationalization, finding a moral justification for a decision made for purely strategic reasons. But here's what's really telling. If Shapiro truly cared about journalistic integrity and the treatment of reporters, where was this concern during the years he spent at Breitbart? The publication was known for its inflammatory rhetoric, its attacks on journalists, and its willingness to publish unsubstantiated stories. Did Shapiro speak out then? Did he defend reporters from other publications when they were attacked? Of course not. This reveals a pattern that will become increasingly obvious throughout this interview. Shapiro's moral positions are entirely situational. He'll defend principles when it's convenient and profitable, but abandon them the moment they become politically costly. The Breitbart exit wasn't about principle, it was about positioning himself as the reasonable, conservative alternative to Trump while Trump was still seen as unelectable. The most damning aspect is how this story demonstrates Shapiro's complete lack of genuine conviction. A person with real principles would have spoken out against Breitbart's editorial direction long before the Lewandowski incident. But Shapiro was happy to cash their checks and benefit from their platform until it became strategically advantageous to leave.
And then Corey Lewandowski proceeded to lie about it, and Breitbart proceeded to throw its own reporter under the bus, suggest that she was lying or making this up. And at that point, I determined that I could no longer work for a publication that wasn't even willing to stand up for its own reporters, and instead would throw those reporters under the bus in favor of a candidate that it sought to back.
Haven't you lost your battle for the Republican Party, though? Isn't the Republican Party now the party of Trump?
No, I mean, I think that the Republican Party is always the party of whomever is the president, technically speaking. But in terms of who are the sort of the thought leaders inside the conservative movement, who are the people who are driving a lot of the discussion inside the conservative movement, I don't think that's correct at all. I think that most Republicans see President Trump as a vehicle for their policy preferences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with all of his personal foibles or the way that he behaves.
This statement is a masterclass in intellectual dishonesty and moral relativism. Shapiro is essentially arguing that character doesn't matter as long as you get the policy outcomes you want. This is the ends justify the means philosophy that he supposedly opposes, but apparently it's acceptable when it serves his political interests. What makes this particularly egregious is that Shapiro built his entire brand on the idea that character matters, that leadership requires moral authority, and that personal conduct is inseparable from policy effectiveness. He's written extensively about how leaders' personal failings undermine their ability to govern effectively. But when it comes to Trump, suddenly all of that goes out the window. The vehicle metaphor is particularly revealing because it reduces the presidency to a mere tool for achieving policy goals. This completely ignores the president's role as a cultural leader, as a symbol of American values, and as someone who sets the tone for political discourse. Shapiro is essentially arguing that none of that matters as long as you get your tax cuts and judicial appointments. But let's examine this logic more closely. If you're willing to support someone whose behavior you find objectionable because they advance your policy preferences, what does that say about the strength of your convictions? Are your principles so weak that you'll abandon them for short-term political gains? This is exactly the kind of transactional thinking that Shapiro claims to oppose. The deeper problem is that this approach is fundamentally anti-conservative. True conservatism values character, tradition, and moral authority. It recognizes that how you achieve your goals matters as much as what those goals are. By reducing politics to a purely transactional calculation, Shapiro is abandoning the philosophical foundations of the movement he claims to represent.
Or the things that he says. And I think a lot of Republicans respond in anger to the media attacking President Trump mainly out of a reactionary and half-appropriate upset that the media seem to have a double standard when it comes to covering certain politicians.
I'm interested that you think there's a thought movement inside the Republican Party. I mean, haven't the Conservatives run out of ideas in America? All the new policies, the Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, the Green New Deal, they're all coming from the left, and they're popular.
Well, frankly, I'm confused by the idea that any of those are particularly new ideas. I mean, most of those ideas have been around since Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the very earliest, or at the very latest, rather. Some of them go all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. But the idea that new ideas are absent in the Republican Party is obviously untrue. We have a very strong debate that goes on inside sort of the conservative halls of intelligentsia about what is the appropriate action to take with regard to the medical system. Should global warming be considered a real threat, or should global warming be considered something that technology will solve? And if so, what are the best aspects of solving that? Now, there's a rich intellectual debate on the right about nationalism versus patriotism, for example, or populism versus free marketeerism. That debate is happening on the right to sort of suggest that the right in America is bereft of ideas, but the left is full of ideas. Number one, not all ideas are good ideas. I mean, AOC is pretty good evidence of that. I'm a big fan of some old ideas myself that I think are pretty good. But beyond that, I think that it is intellectual sneering of the highest order to suggest that only the left has new and decent ideas.
Some of the ideas that are popular in your side of politics would seem to take us back to the Dark Ages. Georgia, new abortion laws, which you are much in favor of, that a woman who miscarries could get 30 years. A Georgian woman who travels to another state for an abortion procedure could get 10 years. These are extreme hard policies.
Well, okay, a couple of things. One, I'm not sure. I mean, frankly, I don't know whether are you an objective journalist or are you an opinion journalist?
I'm a journalist that asks questions.
Okay, so you're a supposedly objective journalist calling policies with which you disagree barbaric and suggesting only one side of the political aisle has ideas.
This is where we witness the complete intellectual collapse of Ben Shapiro in real time. The man who has spent years lecturing others about logic and rational discourse is now having a full emotional breakdown because a journalist dared to ask him to defend his own positions. This isn't debate, it's a tantrum. Let's break down what's actually happening here. Andrew Neil isn't expressing personal opinions about abortion policy, he's presenting the logical consequences of the specific laws that Shapiro supports and asking him to defend them. This is literally what journalism is supposed to do, take policy positions and examine their real-world implications. But Shapiro can't handle this level of scrutiny, so he retreats to attacking the messenger rather than addressing the message. The projection is absolutely stunning. Shapiro, who has built his career on calling opposing viewpoints evil, destructive, and anti-American, is now clutching his pearls because someone used the word barbaric to describe laws that would imprison women for miscarriages. This is the same person who regularly describes progressive policies as fascist and socialist, but apparently strong language is only acceptable when he's the one using it. What's particularly pathetic is how quickly Shapiro abandons his supposed commitment to facts and logic when faced with actual challenge. His entire brand is built on the idea that he's the rational one who destroys opponents with superior arguments. But when confronted with someone who's actually prepared and competent, he immediately retreats to emotional appeals and victim narratives. This moment reveals the fundamental weakness of Shapiro's entire approach. He's not actually interested in defending his ideas on their merits, he's only comfortable when he can control the terms of engagement. Put him in a situation where he has to justify his positions to someone who's done their homework, and he crumbles immediately. The irony is that Neil is actually doing Shapiro a favor by giving him a platform to explain and defend his views. A confident intellectual would welcome this opportunity. But Shapiro is so used to friendly interviews and unprepared opponents that he interprets serious questioning as an attack. This is what happens when you spend years in an echo chamber. You lose the ability to engage with genuine challenge.
So I just want to point out that,
I
wish you would at least be honest in your own biases.
Mr. Shapiro, I know that broadcasting in America is now so polarized that on one program you only have the left, and another one you just have the right. My job is to question those who have strong views and put an alternative to them. If you were an anti-abortion person, I would be putting pro-abortion questions to you, but you are
really. Would you call the pro-choice position?
So why don't you just answer my question,
sir? I'm happy to answer your question. Please answer this one. Would you suggest that a late-term abortion is brutal?
This is a textbook example of intellectual cowardice masquerading as debate tactics. When Shapiro realizes he can't defend the specific policies he supports, he immediately tries to turn the tables and put Neil on the defensive. This isn't clever debate strategy, it's the desperate flailing of someone who knows they're losing the argument. The fundamental problem with this approach is that it reveals Shapiro's complete misunderstanding of what's happening. This isn't a debate between two equal participants, It's an interview where Neil is doing his job as a journalist by asking Shapiro to defend his publicly stated positions. But Shapiro is so used to controlling the narrative that he can't handle being the one answering questions. What's particularly revealing is the specific question he chooses to ask. By pivoting to late-term abortion, Shapiro is trying to steer the conversation toward an area where he thinks he has stronger ground. But this completely ignores the actual issue Neil raised, the specific consequences of the Georgia law that Shapiro supports. This is classic deflection. When you can't defend your actual position, try to change the subject to something easier to defend. The desperation is palpable. Shapiro realizes that he's walked into a trap of his own making. He's publicly supported these abortion laws, but he's never been forced to defend their specific consequences. Now that he's confronted with the reality of what these laws would actually do, imprison women for miscarriages, he can't provide a coherent defense. So instead of engaging with the substance, he tries to make Neil defend positions that Neil never took. This moment perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with modern political discourse. Instead of engaging with difficult questions, politicians and pundits immediately try to turn every conversation into a gotcha game. But real intellectual honesty requires being willing to defend your positions even when it's uncomfortable. Shapiro's inability to do this reveals the fundamental weakness of his entire worldview.
I'm not taking a view on this issue. I'm asking you the questions.
Sir, you just suggested that the pro-life position is inherently brutal and terrible, so I'm asking you, as an objective journalist, would you ask the same question to a pro-choice advocate by calling their position brutal and horrible?
What I'm asking you is that why is it that a bill banning abortions after a woman has been pregnant for 6 weeks is not a return to the Dark Ages? What's your answer?
My answer is something called science. Human life exists at conception. It ought to be protected.
This response is a masterclass in intellectual dishonesty disguised as scientific authority. Shapiro is using the word science like a magic talisman that automatically wins arguments, but he's actually demonstrating a profound misunderstanding of both science and the issue at hand. First, let's address the scientific claim. Yes, from a biological standpoint, a fertilized egg contains unique DNA and is technically alive. But science doesn't make moral or legal determinations about when that life becomes a person deserving of legal protection. That's a philosophical, ethical, and legal question that involves considerations of consciousness, viability, sentience, and social contract theory, none of which are purely scientific matters. But here's the real problem. Shapiro isn't actually interested in the scientific complexity of this issue. He's using science as a conversation stopper, a way to avoid engaging with the difficult ethical and practical questions that his position raises. Real scientific thinking involves acknowledging uncertainty, considering multiple variables, and constantly updating your understanding based on new evidence. Shapiro's approach is the opposite. He's starting with a predetermined conclusion and then cherry-picking scientific facts to support it. The condescending tone is particularly galling. Something called science, as if Neil is too stupid to understand basic biology. This is classic Shapiro behavior. When he can't defend his position substantively, he resorts to intellectual arrogance and condescension. But the arrogance is completely unearned because he's not actually engaging with the scientific complexity of the issue. What's most revealing is what Shapiro completely ignores. Neil isn't asking about the philosophical status of conception, he's asking about the practical consequences of laws that would imprison women for miscarriages. Even if we accept Shapiro's premise about life beginning at conception, that doesn't automatically justify every policy that claims to protect that life. The law Neil is referencing would treat women who lose wanted pregnancies as potential criminals. How does science justify that? This is where we see the fundamental bankruptcy of Shapiro's approach. He's so committed to his ideological position that he can't engage with the human reality of what his policies would actually do. A woman loses her pregnancy through no fault of her own, and Shapiro's science would throw her in prison for 30 years. That's not science, that's barbarism dressed up in pseudo-intellectual language.
Now back to my question to you. You purport to be an objective journalist. BBC purports to be an objective down-the-middle network. It obviously is not. It never has been. And you, as a journalist, are proceeding to call one side of the political aisle ignorant, barbaric, and sending us back to the Dark Ages. Why don't you just say that you're on the left? Is this so hard for you? Why can't you just be honest?
Mr.
Seriously,
Shapiro,
it's a serious question.
Mr. Shapiro, if you only knew how ridiculous that statement is, you wouldn't have said it. So let's move on. Would you vote
I
for
think it's
Mr.
pretty evident from your own questions exactly what you are, sir.
Trump? Would you vote for Mr. Trump in 2020?
I'd certainly consider voting for Mr. Trump in 2020, just like I'd consider voting for anybody else in 2020.
But didn't you once say that you'd never vote for him?
I said that I wouldn't vote for him in 2016.
This exchange represents the complete evisceration of Ben Shapiro's credibility and the exposure of his fundamental dishonesty. We're watching in real time as years of carefully constructed branding crumbles under the weight of basic factual scrutiny. The man who built his reputation on unwavering principles is now engaged in the most pathetic form of political gymnastics imaginable. Let's examine what's really happening here. Shapiro didn't just casually mention that he wouldn't vote for Trump in 2016. He built his entire post-Breitbart brand around being the principled conservative who refused to compromise his values for political expedience. He wrote extensively about Trump's character flaws, his unfitness for office, and the moral bankruptcy of supporting him. He positioned himself as the intellectual alternative to Trumpism, the conservative who wouldn't sell his soul for power. But now, when it's politically convenient, all of that principled opposition evaporates. He's not even honest about the reversal. He tries to minimize it by claiming he was only talking about 2016, as if his objections to Trump were somehow time-limited. This is like saying you opposed murder on Tuesday but you're open to it on Wednesday. The intellectual dishonesty is breathtaking. Shapiro is essentially arguing that his previous moral objections to Trump were conditional and temporary. But moral objections to character flaws don't have expiration dates. If Trump was unfit for office in 2016 because of his character, what changed? Did Trump suddenly become more honest? More competent? More moral? Of course not. What changed was the political calculation. Shapiro realized that continuing to oppose Trump was bad for business. His audience wanted Trump's support, and Shapiro was willing to abandon his principles to give them what they wanted. This isn't intellectual evolution, it's moral cowardice dressed up as pragmatism. The most damning aspect is how this reveals the transactional nature of Shapiro's entire worldview. He doesn't actually believe in the principles he espouses, he believes in whatever is profitable and popular at the moment. This is the behavior of a grifter, not a serious intellectual. A person with genuine convictions would either maintain their opposition or provide a detailed explanation of what changed their mind. Shapiro does neither. He just pretends his previous position was less significant than it actually was.
Now, you're a star of new media, of conservative new media. You and others on the left and the right, you position yourselves as supposed tellers of hard truths. But haven't you all just really coarsened public discourse in America and exacerbated its divisions?
You know, it's kind of odd to be hearing about me coarsening public discourse when you call policies you disagree with brutal and bringing us back to the Dark Ages, sir.
The point, I don't want to return to it, but the point was to put a position for you to reply to it. And I thought we'd covered that. I'll put some of the points too, because on your videos,
characterization of issues is part of the problem in the coarsening of public debate.
Well, maybe it's also part of your problem too, because we have from your YouTube videos, Ben Shapiro destroys the abortion argument. Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism and abortion. Is that not a kind of coarse public discourse?
Well, are those videos labeled by me?
Shapiro is literally trying to distance himself from his own brand identity. The Ben Shapiro destroys format isn't some accident, it's the cornerstone of his entire media empire. His company, The Daily Wire, actively promotes content using exactly this language because it drives engagement and revenue. But here's what makes this so intellectually bankrupt. Shapiro knows exactly how his content is packaged and marketed. He's not some naive academic whose work is being misrepresented by overzealous fans. He's a media entrepreneur who has built a multi-million-dollar business specifically around this combative, destroying brand of political commentary. The "I have no idea" response is particularly laughable. This is a guy who micromanages his brand image, who has teams of people crafting his social media presence, who carefully curates his public persona. But suddenly, when confronted with the logical consequences of that persona, he's completely ignorant of how his own content is presented. This is the behavior of someone who wants all the benefits of inflammatory rhetoric, the views, the engagement, the revenue, but none of the responsibility for its impact on public discourse. It's like a weapons manufacturer claiming they have no idea what people do with their products. You can't build your entire career on verbal warfare and then act surprised when people point out you're contributing to a more combative political environment. What's most telling is his defensive body language and stammering response. This isn't the confident, quick-witted debater his fans think they're getting. This is someone who's been caught red-handed profiting from exactly the kind of discourse he's now trying to distance himself from. The deeper issue here is that Shapiro represents a generation of political commentators who have gamified political discourse. They've turned complex policy discussions into entertainment, reducing nuanced debates to simplistic owns and destroys content. This isn't about advancing conservative principles or improving public understanding. It's about building a brand and generating revenue through perpetual conflict. When Neil confronts him with this reality, Shapiro can't defend it on intellectual grounds because there are no intellectual grounds to defend. That the destroys format is designed to make viewers feel superior to political opponents, not to actually engage with opposing ideas. It's intellectual junk food, satisfying in the moment but ultimately empty of real nutritional value.
I have no idea. But
why are you picking out? Why are you? I have a question. Why are you picking out random YouTube videos put up by people who are not me?
Are you
and then attributing the titles to me?
Are you unhappy with the way they've been described?
The irony here is that Shapiro is essentially proving Neil's point in real time. Instead of reflecting on whether his inflammatory rhetoric might contribute to political polarization, he immediately goes on the attack. This is the same guy who regularly uses terms like leftist scum, radical socialist agenda, and America-hating progressives, but he's clutching his pearls because Neil used the word brutal to describe laws that would imprison women for miscarriages. What we're witnessing is the fundamental problem with modern political discourse, the complete inability to engage in good faith discussion. Shapiro has spent years training his audience to expect constant combat, perpetual outrage, and zero concessions to opposing viewpoints. When confronted with actual journalistic standards that require defending positions rather than just attacking others, he's completely lost. The most revealing part is how he immediately tries to make this about Neil's supposed bias rather than addressing the core question. This is classic deflection. When you can't defend your methods, attack your critics' motives. It's the intellectual equivalent of a toddler pointing at someone else when caught misbehaving.
You say in your new book, you suggest that America's largest struggle at the moment is, quote, the struggle for our national soul. We are so angry at each other right now. And I think that's true. I've just returned from the United States. But aren't you part of the problem with the way you go about your discourse, not the solution?
I think we can all do better in our discourse, but the fact that I've reached out to so many people across the aisle to have conversations with them is pretty evident. The fact that I was willing to walk from a publication that was paying me money over principle is pretty evident. The fact that I've called out President Trump, a member of a party of which I am a member, repeatedly when I think that he has done things that are immoral, I think is decent evidence that I'm looking at least for a civil conversation.
Well, as you say in your book, you say that there's quite a key phrase, we are so angry at each other right now. But as I say, aren't you part of that anger? Aren't you encouraging that anger? For example, you described Mr. Obama's State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist mentality in action.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address said. Is it charged language in politics? Sure. The problem that I have is not with charged language in politics, which I'm generally in favor of.
This is where we witness one of the most intellectually dishonest moments in the entire interview. Shapiro just got caught calling Obama's State of the Union address fascist mentality in action, one of the most inflammatory political accusations you can make, and his defense is essentially, yeah, so what? Let's break down the sheer audacity of this position. Shapiro has spent the entire interview complaining about the coarsening of political discourse, whining about Neil using words like brutal to describe policies, and positioning himself as someone who wants more civil political debate. But when confronted with his own use of the term fascist to describe a standard presidential speech, suddenly he's generally in favor of charged language in politics. This is textbook intellectual cowardice. When it's other people using strong language, it's a sign of bias and unprofessionalism. When it's Shapiro doing it, it's just robust political debate. The double standard is so glaring it's almost comical, except it reveals something much more serious about his entire approach to political commentary. The term fascist isn't just charged language, it's a specific historical and political concept with enormous weight. Fascism represents one of the darkest chapters in human history, involving totalitarian control, systematic oppression, and genocide. To casually throw this term around to describe a Democratic president's speech isn't just inflammatory, it's historically illiterate. But here's what makes this even worse. Shapiro is supposed to be one of the more intellectually serious voices in conservative media. He has a law degree from Harvard, he positions himself as a facts and logic conservative, and he regularly lectures others about precision in language. Yet when it suits his purposes, he'll use the most extreme historical analogies without any apparent understanding of their actual meaning. This reveals the fundamental problem with Shapiro's entire brand of political commentary. He's not actually interested in serious political analysis, he's interested in generating emotional reactions from his audience. Calling Obama a fascist gets clicks, drives engagement, and makes his viewers feel like they're part of some grand struggle against tyranny. The fact that it's historically inaccurate and politically destructive is irrelevant to the business model. That "so what" attitude he displays here is particularly revealing. He's essentially admitting that he doesn't actually care about the impact of his rhetoric on political discourse. He'll use whatever language gets the biggest reaction, regardless of whether it's accurate or constructive. This isn't principled conservatism, it's performance art designed to generate revenue. What's most damaging is how this approach has infected the entire conservative movement. When serious commentators like Shapiro casually throw around terms like fascist and socialist to describe mainstream Democratic positions, it makes actual political dialogue impossible. How do you have a productive conversation about healthcare policy when one side has already labeled the other side as fascists? This is the intellectual rot at the heart of modern political commentary. Instead of engaging with the actual substance of Obama's speech, what policies he proposed, what arguments he made, what vision he articulated, Shapiro reduces it to a historically illiterate inflammatory soundbite designed to trigger an emotional response in his audience.
I like a robust public debate and a very loud and spirited public debate. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I'm talking about is the assumption that people with whom we disagree politically are inherently of bad character or, in your words, want to bring us back to the Dark Ages.
But again, it was your description of the State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist.
The wording of President Trump's 2012 address was bad and wrong.
That's all. There are plenty of things that are bad and wrong, but it doesn't make them fascist.
Well, I suppose that's true. But if you would like to, again, if you'd like to read me the column out loud, I suppose I can critique it for you.
Oh, well, again, with Mr. Obama, you said, and you're Jewish yourself. I only mention that because, to put this in context, the Jews who vote for Obama are, by and large, Jews in name only. Ginos, you call them.
My statement was based on the fact that Jews in the United States, as an ethnic group, are largely irreligious, which is true by every single poll. Jews are the most irreligious group in the United States. As an Orthodox Jew who actually takes Judaism seriously, the point that I am making is that most Jews who are ethnically Jewish are not religiously Jewish in any context.
No. The point you were making is that Jews who vote for Obama are Jews in name only.
I said that, yes, that is correct. That Jews who voted for Barack Obama, a progenitor of the Iran deal, a person who was cracking down on religious liberty, a person who spent much of his career as president of the United States attempting to deprive Israel of the necessities to defend itself, Jews who voted for President Obama, by and large, cared about Judaism far less than they did about other priorities.
Did you say they should
Correct.
turn their badge in as a Jew?
Yes, I believe that if you are somebody who takes Judaism seriously, that comes along with ideological commitment.
This is where Shapiro shows his true colors as an arrogant, self-appointed rabbi of American politics. The guy literally thinks he's the arbiter of Jewish authenticity because he wears a yarmulke and follows kosher laws. This is some next-level narcissism wrapped in religious authority. Here's the thing, Shapiro isn't wrong that many American Jews are secular, but his conclusion is absolutely deranged. He's essentially saying that if you don't vote the way Orthodox Jews vote, you're a fake Jew. By this logic, the millions of Jews who built Hollywood, dominated comedy, created entire industries, and shaped American culture for decades were all just pretending to be Jewish because they didn't vote Republican. The sheer audacity of this little manlet thinking he can revoke people's ethnic identity based on their voting patterns is breathtaking. This is the same guy who built his career attacking identity politics, but apparently it's totally fine when he does it to his own people. The hypocrisy is so thick you could choke on it. What's even more pathetic is how he tries to use statistics to back up his religious supremacist nonsense. Yeah, Ben, American Jews are less religious than other groups. That doesn't mean they're less Jewish, it means they're not buying into your particular brand of political theology. Maybe, just maybe, secular Jews looked at Obama's policies and thought they were better for America than whatever Republican alternative was on offer. But here's the really sick part, Shapiro is doing exactly what anti-Semites have done for centuries, dividing Jews into good Jews and bad Jews based on their political behavior. Except now he's doing it from the inside, which makes it even more destructive. He's literally giving ammunition to people who want to dismiss Jewish voices by saying, well, those aren't real Jews anyway. The Orthodox Jewish community represents maybe 10% of American Jews, but Shapiro thinks his tiny sect gets to determine authenticity for everyone else. This is like the Amish declaring that all other Christians are fake Christians because they use electricity. It's religious extremism disguised as political commentary. Shapiro wants to be seen as speaking for Jewish interests when it benefits him, but when other Jews disagree with his politics, suddenly they're not real Jews. This is the most cynical kind of identity manipulation imaginable. The funniest part is that he's completely wrong about Jewish political behavior throughout history. Jews have been involved in every political movement imaginable: socialist, communist, libertarian, conservative, liberal. The idea that there's one authentic Jewish political position is historically illiterate nonsense from someone who thinks reading Torah commentary makes him a political expert. This isn't about defending Jewish interests, it's about Shapiro's ego. He can't handle the fact that most Jews think his politics are garbage, so instead of examining his positions, he just declares that those Jews don't count. It's the intellectual equivalent of a child taking his ball and going home because the other kids won't play by his rules.
I mean, I guess...
Also, I hope you're having fun, by the way, going through every old tweet that I've ever sent to try and do gotcha questions. But if you'd like to have a discussion about my general philosophy or things I've done in, say, I don't know, that's 2012, so it's now 2019. If you'd like to discuss something I've done in, say, like the past 5 years, why don't we do that? How about that?
Because your book is a criticism of how angry America is and how America has to do better. And I'm simply
I have an entire list on my website, sir. On my list, I have an entire website of dumb, bad things that I've said. I'm simply trying to point out some of the things you've said that seem to me to help to stoke that anger. For example, you said Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. Well, as I say in an article entitled, here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said.
Was that dumb?
Well, yes, that's a dumb tweet. And not only, but it is also important to mention that the next few tweets clarify that that tweet is specifically referring to the Hamas leadership, which, by the way, a BBC I've seen is relatively reticent to condemn.
No, actually, it wasn't. What you went on to do and say, you are correct about the slur on Arabs. It's not all Arabs that want to live in open sewage and blow things up. It's just Palestinians, you went on to say.
No, it says the ones who take sides against Israel in the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Population is rotten to the core, you went on to say. Not Hamas, the Palestinian Arab population.
I say that by poll numbers, they elected Hamas. They educate their children in school that Israel should be obliterated, sir.
I guess
If you want to read, honestly, this is a giant waste of time in the sense that the entire interview is designed for you to shout slogans or old things that I've said at me. I don't see how this forwards the debate. You talk about undermining the public discourse. It seems to me that simply going through and finding lone things that sound bad out of context and then hitting people with them is a way for you to make a quick buck on BBC off the fact that I'm popular and no one has ever heard of you.
there are not many bucks to be made on the BBC, unlike American broadcasting, Mr. Shapiro. The point I'm trying to make is that your words are hardly designed to produce the consensus and understanding that the book seems to want to produce. That's my point, that you write about, Judeo-Christian culture and so on, but so much of what you've said in the past would seem to turn its back on Judeo-Christian culture.
You're lecturing me on Judeo-Christian culture after you call the pro-life position barbaric?
I just asked you a question.
And I asked you a question. You failed to answer a single one of mine. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't
answer
care.
the
I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And I've never heard of you until I briefed myself for this.
This is perhaps the most embarrassing moment in the entire interview, and that's saying something. Shapiro's attempt to dismiss Andrew Neil by claiming he's never heard of him reveals such profound ignorance and arrogance that it's almost hard to watch. This isn't just a failure of preparation, it's a complete exposure of the provincial mindset that underlies Shapiro's entire worldview. Andrew Neil isn't some random blogger or partisan hack. He's one of the most respected journalists in the English-speaking world, with a career spanning decades at the highest levels of British media. He's interviewed every major political figure of the last 30 years, founded successful media companies, and is widely regarded as one of the most skilled interviewers in the business. For Shapiro to claim he's never heard of him is like a basketball player claiming he's never heard of Michael Jordan. But this ignorance isn't accidental, it's systemic. Shapiro operates in such a narrow, American-centric bubble that he genuinely doesn't know who the major figures are in international media. This is the intellectual provincialism that characterizes so much of American political discourse. If you're not part of the American conservative media ecosystem, you simply don't exist. The arrogance is breathtaking. Shapiro is essentially arguing that because he's never heard of someone, they must not be important. This is the mindset of someone who has spent so long being the smartest person in his carefully curated room that he can't conceive of expertise existing outside his sphere of awareness. It's the intellectual equivalent of thinking the world revolves around you. But here's what makes this particularly pathetic. Shapiro is sitting in the BBC studios, being interviewed by the BBC's flagship political program, and he has the audacity to claim that the BBC's most prominent political interviewer is irrelevant. This is like going on 60 Minutes and claiming you've never heard of the host. The lack of basic professional awareness is stunning. The timing of this outburst is also perfect. Shapiro doesn't lead with this dismissal, he saves it for when he's been completely intellectually dismantled and has no substantive response left. This is the last resort of someone who knows they've lost the argument but can't admit it. Instead of acknowledging that he's been outmatched by a superior interviewer, he tries to diminish Neil's credibility. What's most revealing is how this moment encapsulates everything wrong with Shapiro's approach to intellectual discourse. He's not interested in engaging with ideas on their merits, he's only interested in maintaining his position in the hierarchy. When faced with someone who challenges that hierarchy, he doesn't rise to the occasion, he tries to tear them down. This is the behavior of an intellectual coward. A confident person would acknowledge their opponent's credentials and engage with their arguments. But Shapiro can't do that because it would require admitting that he's been bested by someone he didn't even know existed. So instead, he tries to make Neil's expertise disappear by denying it exists.
But that's not the issue. You have a new book out.
Then why the hell are you interviewing me, sir?
It's an interesting book. But my point is, your book claims that society...
Well, it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is... Well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book claims that society is turning its back on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
what are those values? What are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer.
This is the final, pathetic death rattle of Ben Shapiro's intellectual pretensions. The man who has spent years claiming to be the champion of rational discourse is now running away from an interview while hurling personal attacks at a journalist who had the audacity to ask him to defend his own positions. This isn't just a failure of argumentation, it's a complete moral and intellectual collapse. Let's examine what badly motivated actually means in this context. Andrew Neil's motivation was to conduct a professional interview that would give viewers insight into Shapiro's worldview and the reasoning behind his positions. He came prepared with specific quotes, policy positions, and factual questions. He gave Shapiro multiple opportunities to explain and defend his views. This is literally what good journalism looks like. But in Shapiro's warped perspective, asking tough questions equals bad motivation. This reveals everything about how he's accustomed to operating. He's used to friendly interviews where hosts toss him softball questions that allow him to recite his talking points unchallenged. He's used to debating unprepared college students who can't match his rhetorical skills. When faced with actual professional competence, he interprets it as hostility. The projection is absolutely stunning. Shapiro, who has built his career on attacking people's motivations rather than addressing their arguments, is now accusing Neil of being badly motivated. This is the same person who regularly impugns the character and intentions of anyone who disagrees with him. But when someone does actual journalism by holding him accountable for his own words, suddenly questioning motivations is unfair. What's particularly revealing is the timing of this accusation. Shapiro doesn't level this charge at the beginning of the interview, he saves it for when he's been completely cornered and has no substantive response left. This is the behavior of someone who knows they've lost the argument but can't admit it. Instead of acknowledging that he's been outmatched, he attacks the process and the person. The cowardice is palpable. A confident intellectual would welcome the opportunity to defend their ideas against serious challenge. They would see tough questions as a chance to demonstrate the strength of their convictions. But Shapiro runs away while claiming the other person is the problem. This is the intellectual equivalent of taking your ball and going home when you start losing the game. This moment perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with modern conservative discourse. Instead of engaging with difficult questions, they immediately retreat to victimhood narratives and personal attacks. They've become so comfortable in their echo chambers that they've lost the ability to defend their ideas in neutral territory. Shapiro's meltdown is just the most dramatic example of this broader intellectual cowardice.
So I think we're done here. I appreciate your time, sir.
All right,
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
This interview represents nothing less than the total systematic destruction of Ben Shapiro's carefully constructed intellectual persona. What we've witnessed isn't just a bad interview or a rough day at the office, it's the complete exposure of a fundamentally hollow operation that has been masquerading as serious intellectual discourse for years. The first thing that becomes clear is that Shapiro's entire brand is built on a foundation of intellectual cowardice. He spent years cultivating an image as the fearless debate champion who destroys opponents with facts and logic, but this interview reveals that he's only comfortable when he can control the terms of engagement. Put him in a situation where he faces actual professional competence, and he crumbles immediately. The pattern is consistent throughout. Whenever Shapiro encounters a question he can't easily deflect, he immediately abandons substantive engagement and retreats to personal attacks, process complaints, or victim narratives. This is the behavior of someone who knows their arguments can't withstand scrutiny, so they try to avoid that scrutiny by any means necessary. But the intellectual dishonesty goes deeper than mere debate tactics. What this interview exposes is that Shapiro doesn't actually believe in the principles he claims to champion. His supposed commitment to facts and logic disappears the moment those facts become inconvenient. His alleged independence evaporates when it conflicts with his audience's preferences. His claimed moral authority crumbles when tested against real-world consequences. The Trump flip-flop is particularly revealing because it shows how Shapiro's entire worldview is purely transactional. He doesn't have genuine convictions, He has market positions that he adjusts based on political convenience. This isn't intellectual evolution, it's moral cowardice disguised as pragmatism. The most damaging aspect is how this interview reveals the fundamental provincialism that underlies Shapiro's entire operation. His dismissal of Andrew Neil as irrelevant simply because he's never heard of him exposes the narrow, American-centric bubble that Shapiro inhabits. This is someone who claims to be a serious intellectual but doesn't even know who the major figures are in international media. This provincialism isn't just about geography, it's about intellectual method. Shapiro operates in such a narrow ecosystem that he's lost the ability to engage with serious challenge. He's used to friendly interviews, unprepared opponents, and audiences that already agree with him. When faced with actual professional journalism, he doesn't know how to respond except with anger and personal attacks. The interview also exposes the fundamental weakness of Shapiro's argumentative approach. He's not actually interested in defending his ideas on their merits, he's only interested in winning debates through rhetorical tricks and emotional manipulation. This works fine when you're debating college students or appearing on friendly shows, but it falls apart completely when you encounter genuine competence. What makes this particularly damning is that Neil isn't even trying to destroy Shapiro, he's simply doing his job as a journalist by asking relevant questions about publicly stated positions. The fact that Shapiro interprets this as an attack reveals how accustomed he is to operating in a consequence-free environment where his ideas are never seriously challenged. The broader implications are significant. Shapiro represents a generation of conservative commentators who have built their careers on the collapse of serious intellectual discourse. They've figured out that you can gain massive audiences by confirming existing biases rather than challenging them, by providing emotional satisfaction rather than intellectual rigor, by creating the appearance of serious thought without actually engaging in it. This interview is important because it shows what happens when this approach encounters actual standards. When forced to defend his positions to someone who's done their homework, Shapiro's entire edifice collapses. The logical contradictions become apparent, the moral bankruptcy becomes obvious, and the intellectual cowardice becomes undeniable. The walkout is the perfect metaphor for this entire phenomenon. When reality conflicts with ideology, when facts challenge feelings, when genuine inquiry threatens profitable narratives, these commentators don't engage, they flee. They take their ball and go home, claiming persecution while revealing their own intellectual bankruptcy. But perhaps most importantly, this interview demonstrates the vital importance of actual journalism in a democracy. Andrew Neil didn't destroy Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro destroyed himself by being forced to confront the consequences of his own positions. All Neil did was ask the questions that American media should have been asking for years but was too captured by ratings and access to pursue. This is what journalism looks like when it's done properly, prepared, persistent, and focused on substance rather than spectacle. It's a reminder that democracy depends on having institutions that can hold public figures accountable for their words and actions, regardless of their popularity or political affiliation. The tragedy is that this kind of accountability is increasingly rare in American media. Too many outlets are more interested in generating heat than light, more focused on confirming biases than challenging them. The result is a media ecosystem that allows figures like Shapiro to thrive without ever being seriously tested. This interview should serve as a wake-up call for anyone who takes intellectual discourse seriously. It shows what happens when we allow style to triumph over substance, when we mistake confidence for competence, when we prioritize entertainment over enlightenment. The consequences aren't just academic, they're democratic, because a society that can't distinguish between serious thought and intellectual performance is a society that's vulnerable to demagogues and grifters. The ultimate lesson is that real intellectual authority can't be faked. You can build a brand, cultivate an audience, and generate revenue by playing to people's biases and prejudices. But when you're forced to defend your ideas in a neutral arena against competent opposition, the truth becomes apparent. Ben Shapiro's humiliation in this interview is a reminder that intellectual integrity matters, that preparation beats performance, and that genuine expertise will always triumph over manufactured authority.